Hi, my name is John Golden. I'm a digital artist, and today I'm going to be showing you how to make resin jewelry. We're going to be using silver plate rings and pewter pendants, and I use my digital output when I create artwork for my jewelry. And when you're going to do that, you got to coat it with something like Mod Podge. Mod Podge is good. It seals it, keeps the ink from bleeding out into the resin when it's done properly. You might have some problems where resin will soak into the paper or the ink itself will bleed if you don't put a good couple of coats on each side of your piece of paper. If you're doing a bunch of small pieces, it's a lot easier to coat several pieces at once on one piece of paper. I'm cutting this one out super high speed here just so you can kind of get a feel for where we're headed with this. And after that I will put Mod Podge on the back of that as well. I like to do at least 2 coats. This is a piece of artwork for a pewter pendant. I always like to test the size, make sure it fits before I proceed if I'm cutting these out before I do all my Mod Podge work. So this kind of shows you why you might want to put all your Mod Podge on the whole complete sheet rather than doing a little bit at a time with each piece. It's kind of hard to hold it and make sure you're getting a good coat. But for this particular tutorial, I wanted to go ahead and show you, give you the basic idea of how we need to seal this. We're going to take Mod Podge and put a good coating of it inside the pendant. And once we've done that, we can go ahead and glue the artwork down. And I like to use a burnisher to make sure I'm getting good contact and really get those edges down as much as possible. Once the pendant is glued down, I go back in and put a nice coat of Mod Podge on the top, and I try to build it up in the edges of the pendant as well, because that's where your weak spots are going to be, where the paper allows resin to seep in. And it will not really discolor, but it will look wet while the rest of your artwork will look more dry. And you can kind of see a nice thick coat of Mod Podge on this particular pendant. Now this is the way that I prefer to do it. Again, I've sped this up so that you don't have to watch me do this over a long period of time, but this is putting Mod Podge on the back. You might, if you don't have a light table, you'd probably need to lift it up and down, let a little light show under it so you can tell if you're getting a good coat. And again, I like to do 2 coats. Once you're done coating both sides with Mod Podge twice, you can go ahead and start cutting your artwork into separate pieces. It makes it a little easier to do this in batches. I like to use really small scissors. They're just a lot easier to control. I've done this with an X-Acto knife before, and it's just a little harder for me personally to cut a circle that way. I go through all my pieces of artwork and cut them out. Go ahead and pair them up with a pendant or a ring, whichever you happen to be making at the time. And once I've done that, I'll worry about making sure the sizes are good for the particular pendant or ring that I've chosen. So you continue on. If you're doing this in batches, again, I recommend that because resin doesn't have a really long window of workability. So it's not suited to doing one thing at a time unless you're comfortable mixing up very small batches of resin. Just to reiterate, I think it's really important to get as much of your sealer or Mod Podge where the artwork meets the lip of your pendant or ring, because I feel like that's an area where resin can get in and get in contact with the paper and look wet while the rest of your art looks dry. And make sure you get a really good coat of Mod Podge or sealer on top of that artwork. And you will probably have some instances where you get a little bit of your Mod Podge on the outside of the pendant or ring. Not so much with the rings that I use because they have a pretty deep cut, but these pendants are relatively shallow, and depending on the size of your brush, the Mod Podge can get on the outside, and for the most part, just able to take those and wipe them clean with your finger. So that's it. We've got a bunch of pendants now ready to go. I will let them dry overnight and take a look at them again before I get ready to pour resin, because I don't want to have any, as I said, weak spots where resin can get in contact with the paper. So finally we get down to the business of pouring resin, and I like to do this outside because ventilation is crucial. One reason I don't like to do it outside is the amount of dust, pollen, things like that. So I clean my table, and then I take some sheets of wax paper and put those over the table anywhere that I think I'm going to be using resin. I like to put my rings and pendants in some nice hard plastic trays, the bottoms of which are lined with wax paper. You try to find a tray that has a very flat bottom. It'll just make it easier to keep your rings and pendants level. And then I cover them with an underbed storage plastic container. Before you pour your resin, you'll need to make some sort of jigs that can hold your rings and pendants flat during the pouring process, because rings just won't naturally stay that way, and the pewter pendants I use have a bail attached, which actually tilts them a little bit. I've made these out of foam core and mat board scraps, and they work great for basically just keeping things in place during the process and keep them flat. Here's a little side view for you so you can see kind of how this works. I like to use EasyCast brand epoxy. It is, as the name implies, very easy to use. It is a 1-to-1 ratio, so it's kind of hard to mess up the mix between hardener and epoxy. You're going to need measuring cups. You can buy a disposable kind, or you can buy a less disposable kind, but really they're both going to end up disposable unless you've got time to really clean them up. You need vinyl or latex gloves, a couple of stirring sticks. I use popsicle sticks most of the time, and some disposable plastic cups. You don't want to use wax because that can get into the epoxy itself. You can have rubbing alcohol. That's supposed to clean up the epoxy while it's still wet. I have not tried it, and I like to put my epoxy in a clear condiment bottle before I dispense it, because it's just a little easier. And of course, wax paper is good to have. Cover everything up. It makes cleanup a lot easier. Something else you're probably going to want is a timer, because you need to mix EasyCast for 2 minutes during 2 different parts. So it's good to have this, something that's easy to set and reset.